Good morning, my name is Chris Fox, and today we're talking about how I got started as an author. So this is a question that I get quite often now. The channel's really been exploding lately. We are gaining like 2,000 to 3,000 subscribers a month. And so I've got a lot of people who really have no idea who I am or sort of how I got into this industry. And today I want to cover that. So my journey begins all the way back in 1993. I had been in a gifted and talented class and had been told, as many of us had by our teachers, that I was meant to be a writer, that I was going to be an author, that, I had something to give the world. I was gifted and talented. And I believed all that stuff. And I had this ginormous chip on my shoulder and thought, here I'm going to be this great artist. And my understanding of the way that writing worked back then was that you're born a great writer. You don't have to work for this. Either you are or are not. There is no middle ground. There is no you work and become a great writer. And so, of course, I tried to sit down and write my very first novel. I'd already had a short story published, and that short story had done pretty well. But it was in a student journal. It wasn't like a real publication. It was somebody who only published students, and I didn't really understand that. So when I sat down to write that first novel, I failed. I failed utterly. I got about 4 chapters into it, and I tried to get people to read my 4 chapters, and I expected them to tell me, how brilliant I was. And for whatever reason, they didn't. They told me that it was terrible, and I could see the pain in their faces where, like, they want to say something nice about this story, but they can't because it is bad. And so I quit. I quit for, gosh, I want to say probably a decade. So I didn't start really seriously writing again until maybe 2003. A role-playing game called Exalted had come out, and I was so enamored by this world that they had created, this pseudo-mythological world, that I wanted to add to it. And I wrote an entire novel. I just sat down and started cranking out chapters. And before I knew it, I had this wonderful book written. And it was actually pretty good. I had no way to market it. I had no way to get this in front of a publisher. And because it was effectively fan fiction, it's not like I could do anything with this book. But I had proven to myself, wait a minute, I could write. I could. And so I was resolved that I was going to find a way to do this professionally, and I started looking. And unfortunately, in this time period, in 2003, 2004, your only real option was to go through a big publisher. You needed to find a big company that was willing to publish your book. And I didn't have the skills, the capital, or really the mental fortitude to do that. And so I gave up for a second time. I knew that I loved to write, but I decided that writing would just be a hobby. It would be something that I did for fun, and that I never tried to make a career out of. And let's fast forward now to 2009. So now I've been practicing writing a lot more. I have finished several novels, and each of these has taken me a few years. They're not necessarily good novels at this point. I didn't really know what I was doing in 2009 and hadn't spent enough time studying story structure. But I was starting to get a clue, starting to get better. And this is when I conceived of the novel that would ultimately become No Such Thing as Werewolves, my very first book. And this is the one that I released in October of 2014. That's the part of the journey, I guess, that's going to give you the framing of where I was at mentally, where I didn't think that you could make money selling books. And that wasn't really my goal. When I published No Such Thing as Werewolves, I wasn't trying to make that my day job or to become a writer. I wanted to publish a book so I could say to my friends and my family, hey guys, look, I have this story. This is what I've always wanted to do for my entire life. Here it is. And that was the reasoning behind it. But it just so happened that I worked at a startup at the time in San Francisco called CellScope. So what we did is we made an app. There was a microscope that would attach to your iPhone, and you could do an ear exam, and then my app would upload that ear exam video to a doctor to be diagnosed. So he could say, or she could say, you've got an ear infection, you need to come into the ER, or it looks okay, so you don't need to take your 2-year-old out of the house in the middle of the night to go to urgent care. And it was really neat, but because I worked at this company, because I was in the beating tech heart capital of the world, I was able to see how publishing was changing. And I realized very quickly that you could game the marketplace effectively. If you understood how data science worked, you could get your book to the top of the pile. So when I first published No Such Thing as Werewolves, I advertised it on all the sites that were available. I went to the writing forums, K-boards, and I put out the word that I was doing this. But I very quickly realized that my also bots were strange. There were cookbooks and, other odd things in there that didn't seem like they should belong attached to a werewolf book. And those were called your also bots. And back in 2013 and 2014, they were more mysterious than they are today, but people understood some things about them, and I started to study them. And it was understanding those also bots that really put me on the map. I began to realize how Amazon recommends books and to try to tap into that. And I did that very early in my career. So when I released my first book, the challenges that I ran into are a little bit different than what you're going to face today. But at their core, they're exactly the same as someone publishing a book today. There's a ton of competition, just like there was back then. Arguably, there's more now, but there's also a much larger audience of people consuming these books. There's more people in Kindle Unlimited. There's more people that are reading on e-readers. More people are finding their books online. So there's still plenty of audience out there left for us to grab. And what you need to do is the same thing I had to do back then. You've got to really focus on cover. You know, you hear me beat this drum on this channel all the time, but your cover is like 80% of your overall success as an author, because that's your business card to the world. This is what tells somebody a visual cue, I'm going to be interested in this book or I'm not. You know, if I see 4 werewolves or hunky guys and a mix of werewolves standing around, you know, a woman, I know that I'm looking at probably a shifter harem romance. That's not a book that I personally am interested in. But if you are interested in that genre, you're going to be all over it from the cover. If, on the other hand, you show me a Tom Edwards spaceship and or a cool looking alien on that cover, you've got my attention. If you've got dragons or swords or magic or castles, you've got my attention. These are things that I'm into. So if I could go back in time and talk to Chris in 2014, and that Chris was to ask me, what are the most important things that you need to know in this industry, I would say you've got to understand your audience. You need to know what's hot right now, what it is they're interested in, and then show that to them. I'm not saying that you necessarily even need to compromise the content of your book that much. You know, in some cases it makes sense to change the genre or the tropes that you're working with to fit a market, but if you're unwilling to do that, the simple act of showing people what your book is about is usually enough. You know, if you look at TechMage, my most recent series, this series is not written to market. You know, there is no space fantasy market I'm following where I'm like, oh, all the space fantasy books do this, and they've all got their dragons like this, and they've all got their dead gods in space like this. No, I'm making all this stuff up. And I'm trying to put it in such a way that people who are like me, my target audience, will see this stuff and be interested. So if you're starting today, if you know no one in this industry, if you have no author contacts, and you've gotten, you know, really no inroads anywhere, the 2 things that you should be doing are focusing on learning about your audience and then on crafting a blurb and a cover that is going to impress those people. What is going to make people like your book? And these 2 skills are just as important as the craft itself. So learning to write a great story, if you can master these 2 skills and then also tell a good story, you're ready to rock. All the rest of the stuff like advertising or newsletter swaps with other authors, that can come in time. It comes with experience. You know, you sort of learn from there. But I've seen tons of authors, and I've seen this recently, we're talking in the last couple of months, break out and suddenly have a hit that is making them 5-figure months consistently because they had the right cover and the right blurb. All you have to do is kind of strum those audience heartstrings and tell them, I'm going to give you an emotional experience that's like what you're looking for, and people will read it in droves, especially in Kindle Unlimited. So I think we have this tendency as authors to assume maybe that there are a whole bunch more things that we need to be working on, and there are. You've got to get, you know, a mailing list set up and get that done right, and you've got to start advertising. But I didn't do any of that stuff for my first book. The only advertising I did, back then AMS ads didn't exist, Facebook ads were basically unknown. There were sites like BookBub and eReader News Today and other similar services, and these services would broadcast your book once. So they'd tell their list once. You could kind of get like a one-time promo. But there wasn't the trickle of daily advertising that we can do now. Lots and lots of those tools didn't exist, but even the ones that did, I didn't know how to use them. You know, I put out No Such Thing as Werewolves, and then I tried to learn everything I could about marketing, and I tried to do one thing every day to market a little bit further. And it's interesting because it took me over a year to realize that wasn't the right series. That wasn't the series that was going to put me on the map. You know, I spun my wheels and I spun my wheels, and the series did pretty well, but the reality was, in the way that I had marketed it, there was a limited audience, and I wasn't ever going to exceed that. So, I don't know, I guess probably the best lesson would have been maybe to publish even earlier than I did and just jump in with both feet and start learning. Because the real learning in this industry comes when you publish your first book. You're going to make a ton of mistakes. You're going to learn a lot of stuff. And you're going to probably be down in the doldrums, most of us, because while it is possible your book could take off, it's far more likely it won't. It'll probably sink. It probably won't do terribly well. This is what most of us run into. And when that happens, we tend to panic and think, oh man, if I was really a good author, my book would have went straight Andy Weir. And, I would say shake that tendency. Accept that your book's probably not going to do great. And then every single time you release another book, every couple of months when you promote the first one, try to do better than you did before. Learn a little bit more. Meet a few more authors in your genre. That really is all I did. There was no kind of magical turning point per se. My career has had a very gradual rise. It's just been, like kind of a straight line up where I keep being on more podcasts and going to more conventions and releasing more books and just slowly growing. And now it has the appearance that it's growing very quickly because I've been doing it so long and I have so much momentum, but that wasn't the case with my first book. It took me 6 months to get out book 2 in the series and an additional 6 months to get out book 3. So back then that was considered pretty quick. Today, people are doing like 2 and 3 and 4 books a month. It's just crazy. Don't expect yourself to hit that right off the bat. Be okay with the fact that it's going to take you some time to get out a quality sequel and focus on quality. Don't rush a book out just to get a book out. Get books out that you're proud of. I realize there is pressure to get books out and we all have to write very quickly, and I still do, and I'm not saying that you should slow down and spend 2 years polishing your book. I am saying, though, that if an extra pass that's going to take you 3 more weeks is going to result in a 10% improvement, maybe that's worth it. Maybe that's worth it. Anyway, I realize this video is somewhat rambly, and I'm not sure how much of the 2014 picture I captured or how much you now understand about my writing career that you didn't before. But I started out just like everybody else, kind of in the right place at the right time, but I've made a lot of mistakes, and almost all of where I'm at right now is as a direct result of learning from one of those mistakes. Like I'd try something, it wouldn't work. I would really pick apart why it didn't work. Like Hero Born is a great example. My second series, I tried to do X-Files meets Heroes, and that series bombed. Really did poorly, but I've learned more from those 2 short books than I have from any other books in my career. It was after that I figured out how to write to market and how Destroyer really was launched. So your biggest mistakes can often lead to your greatest successes. Just get started. Get that first book published wherever you're at right now. Don't worry about the marketing plan. Do the best you can, put it out there, and go. This book could be unpublished if it doesn't work. You can always try again later, but at the very least you can say, I did it, I tried, I took the step, I took the risk, I took the action. And be proud of yourself. Pat yourself on the back. This is not an easy industry. And anybody who publishes a novel, guys, you wrote a friggin' novel. Like, you finished a book. How many writer friends have you known in your entire life who said they were going to do that and then just didn't? You are doing amazing things. So guys, keep writing. Keep kicking butt. You will surprise yourself, I think. Anyway, I've got a very busy week. I am leaving tomorrow. In fact, when you watch this video, I will be in Chicago at the Sell More Book Show Summit. So yeah, I've got to do that, and I also, of course, have to get back to the writing. I've got to get the next Magitech Chronicles book out. Last caveat before I let you go, Plot Gardening is doing enormously well. The paperback was released, and lots of you are buying it, so thank you for that. Audio should be out next week. That's pretty much it, guys. I'll see you next week.